This is really the last period of the Greeks, that you really talk about, just the rise of Macedonia. Of course, talk a little bit about who the Macedonians were and all of that. Macedonia was actually a kingdom that was, located up in the northern part of Greece. It's actually a part of Greece and also part of what is called Macedon or Macedonia, which is now a republic today. And they became a major power in about the mid part of the 4th century BC. They started probably as a city-state. I think one of their great cities is called Pella. You have heard of it, Pella. And over time, it grew into like a kingdom. And probably might be confused about the name and all that. Like, what's the deal? I notice they call it Macedon, and then also they call it Macedonia, which is correct. It's either one. They're called either one. But it originates supposedly from a man that was named Macedon, who was some kind of ancestor of theirs that lived a long time ago, kind of like Helen. Remember Helen, who was the ancestor of the Greek tribes that came in later, the Hellenes? So it's kind of like that. Although they're not sure if he was a king or like some kind of chiefdom. That may have been like a chieftain of maybe one of their tribal groups or whatever. But they do know that the name Macedon meant in Greek tall one, because they're evidently maybe taller than average. Sometimes they also translate it as meaning Highlander, because they came from the mountains of like northern Greece and all that. What happened over time was the name was slurred. So it was originally pronounced Macedon, but over time it became Macedon, which I think they started using that in the West, like France and other countries in Europe. And then Macedonia is just kind of like a variation of the same name, basically. I think that's more of maybe the Roman equivalent that'll be, of course, later. Now, I usually talk about first Alexander's father, Alexander the Great's father, of course, who's Philip II of Macedon. He's, of course, really the first famous ruler that you really have that comes to power. He was in power in the mid part of the 4th century BC. You can see there. Reigned about 20-something years, and Philip was mostly known over time for consolidating a lot of the Greek states together, like as one power, which will later be called the League of Corinth, which is what it was called, except Sparta wasn't in it. And Philip had these later crazy ideas at the time, which was to try to conquer Persia, which people thought he was probably crazy about that idea. But he had that idea to invade them and, finish the wars, that the Greeks had started a long time ago with the Persians. But it would be his son that would do it, which would be Alexander the Great, who would go on to eventually conquer, of course, the Persian Empire. Philip was known for developing the military of the Macedonians, they say. And one thing that the Macedonians were famous for was a type of military tactic called sword and shield. It's called other names too, I think. I think it's called hammer and anvil, or some other names they call it too as well. It's a type of offensive type warfare where what they would do is they'd use their cavalry as an offensive weapon to try to attack like mostly the flanks of the enemy armies. Then the infantry would hold them in the middle as a defensive type force, basically. So they're the ones that kind of popularized that idea. And so other people kind of copied those military tactics, over time, overall. The Macedonians relied on these long spears that were called a sarissa. It's called now a pike. That's used a lot later in modern times. I know you've heard about the pikes being used under the new model army. You ever heard the story about the English Civil War, modern times? I think that was one of the last period where maybe pikes were used up to modern times. It was like the 17th century they used them. So for a long time, these were used over like 2,000 years in battle. And so infantry foot soldiers would use these. I think I've got pictures showing the use of them of the pikes, which are right here. So they use them in formation. And the one thing about the sarissa was that they had to take that off there. They'd have to hold it with two hands. It wasn't like the hoplite spears where they had just used with their they got one hand right this, like trying to kill somebody in front of them with their spear. They got to actually use it with both hands. And part of why it was developed was mostly to counter cavalry. That's why they developed the sarissa, they believe. And it was pretty effective, especially when Alexander started using it against the Persians. And Persians really didn't have a match for it later on. So they literally, like several, I think the first 3 or 4 rows would lower their spears in battle. I think the ones in the back would even be used to deflect like javelins and other things that are shot at them, stuff like that. They had armor, but I think their armor wasn't as much compared to some of the armor that was earlier used by the other hoplites before and all that. Then they had of course, what's the other slide I need? Oh yeah, this one here. Of course, the other thing that's real famous about the Macedonians was their great cavalry that they were known for, which is called the companion cavalry, something they think Philip developed as well. It was elite cavalry, heavy cavalry. It was mostly, I think, nobility, although I think some of the lower classes were in it too as well. Like I said, it was used as an offensive weapon to attack enemy flanks. And a lot of times they would try to attack gaps, like in some of the flanks of the infantry or whatever. And I know under Alexander, they got up to like 2,000-3,000 cavalrymen that were actually in it. And later, Alexander is the one that actually led the companion cavalry, like under his father, and later in a lot of battles as well. It's part of why Alexander won a lot of his battles later, because it was just so effective against the Persians later. I've got some other slides in here too if you want to look at them later. Here's a map of kind of the Macedonian region, the Greek world at the time. Casey, you're having trouble coming in, so I don't know what you're going to do, but I think maybe you're not logged into Facebook is probably your problem. So I want to look into that. I'll have to kick you out again. But anyway, there's a map of Macedonia. Of course, you're looking at right there. Of course, Macedon or Macedonia in the north. You can see Pella. It's one of their major cities right there. And you see all the Greeks down there, and of course, city-states, of course, in the south. Those are all later part of the ones in yellow were part of the League of Corinth, which, of course, Philip invaded Greece later, if you know about this, in the 350s, and eventually forced them to form this alliance together. It's also called the Greek League or Hellenic League. They called it later. And over a period of like 15, 20 years, that's basically what that was, more or less. And the only city state that was not in it was Sparta. And I don't know who this guy is on there, but he's being a jerk. But anyway, so that was what the League of Corinth was. And yeah, the League of Corinth was an idea to basically, I'll have to do something about that guy. I don't know who he is. Just get off here. This guy's a jerk. I'll hide his comments is what I can do. This guy's a jerk, whoever he is. But anyway, League of Corinth was an idea of Philip II to... I'm laughing about that. Some guy on Facebook, he's a jerk. Is there any way to get him off there? I'm trying to think how to do that. Hide comments. God. I'm trying to think. Hold on a second here. Let me go to that real quick and see if I can get into Facebook here. Hold on a second here. I got a problem with something here. I don't know how to get rid of that guy. Some dude on there sending all kinds of junk on there. I have to block him or something. Hold on a second here. I don't know who he is. It's a pain in the butt, though, whatever it is. I don't know who that is. But anyway, that's crazy stuff I got on here going on. Some dude on there doing something about a lecture. But anyway, back to the lecture, what I was talking about. So anyway, what happened though was that Alexander the Great, of course, came to power because Philip II was assassinated. He was assassinated at a royal banquet by Pausanias. Pausanias was this ex-bodyguard of Alexander, I'm just kind of doing something here. Get this out of here. I don't know what this is, but anyway. But this guy is ridiculous. I don't know who you are. It's got to be a way to get this guy off here. It's kind of a pain. Let me see on here. Let's see. Hold on here. It's the way to get that guy off of here. Got a problem with some issue with this thing. Oh man, I need to get rid of this guy. Anyway, sorry about that. Some issue on Facebook I'm having with some guy on there. He's a jerk. But anyway, just go away, dude. To fight this all day with you. There's got to be a way to get that off of here. I'll just delete it then. Fine. Screw you. But anyway, so just come on YouTube. I don't know who that guy is. But anyway, I'll have to block him later. But some guy's on there messing with me, but I can't stand that. Anyway, back to the lecture, what I was talking about. So Pausanias was this bodyguard of Alexander the Great. I have to redo this lecture here, because I'm screwing up because this guy on here was a jerk, whoever he was. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened. Let me get back with my train of thought here, what I was talking about. Anyway, so Pausanias was his bodyguard, or ex-bodyguard of actual Philip II. He had, of course, I think been fired by Philip II. And so what happened was he killed Philip at a royal banquet. I think it was a wedding of some type. And so what happened was after that, it allowed Alexander to take power eventually. Alexander came to power in 336 BC. He was 20 years old, and he would reign for about 13 years. So there's been a lot of theories about, who was behind the assassination and all of that. And I think they seem to think that likely that maybe Queen Olympias may have been behind it. I think I had a slide on that I could show with you as well. Where's that one on Olympias? But Queen Olympias was they think the wife of Philip II, one of several wives that he had overall. And she may have been behind it. They don't know. It's still a mystery about who actually was behind the assassination of Philip. Some people think it was that, or maybe some Persians were behind it also as well. They could have been behind it. So they don't really know for sure. But we do know that Alexander then seized power afterwards, and he was able to consolidate his power pretty much over, pretty much the Greek world after that. So that's how Alexander came into power at that point. Let's see. So they had that. So talk a little bit about the background of Alexander the Great and some things about him overall. Now, Alexander at a very young age was, like I said, I talked about it before, but he was tutored by Aristotle. His father, Philip, had brought the Greek philosopher Aristotle back from Greece, from Athens, to set up a school there. And the school was set up to train not just Macedonian men like young men like Alexander the Great, but also other noblemen's children, more or less. And anyway, he taught it for like maybe middle school, high school. I think from like maybe 9 to about 16 years old. And Aristotle, of course, had a big influence on, of course, Alexander the Great, of course, later. We talked about that already before, so I won't talk much about that. I usually talk about Alexander's horse, which is very famous. Alexander had this horse named Bucephalus, which the name meant ox head. And it was a horse that he got when he was very young. Anyway, what happened was it was a gift to his father. And what happened was basically he decided to buy it from his father. And of course, a lot of people didn't think he could, ride this horse because he was so young. And then also the horse was very wild, would buck people off, etc. And so he was able to figure out why the horse was so skittish. It was because it was afraid of its own shadow, more or less. And so he figured out that if he turned the horse toward the sun, that it would not be afraid of his shadow, and he would be able to ride it, in which he would, of course, later. Alexander also had a friend named Ephesian, they always talk about as well. I was laughing about that stuff the guy was sending on there, but I don't know who that guy was. I don't know who he is, But anyway, it's something that people on stream I probably don't understand, but if you're on Facebook, you probably saw that trash, idiots. But supposedly Ephesian was a lover of Alexander. I don't know if that's true or not, more or less. But anyway, the two are very, very close friends. Although Alexander would later go on to marry 2 women. His most famous wife later was Roxana, who I think gave him at least 1 son, more or less. Now let's get into also, I need to talk about as well the different books that were written about Alexander real quick. These are the ones that are real famous that wrote about Alexander. They have Diodorus of Sicily, was supposedly one of the oldest sources ever written about Alexander a long time ago. That one's written about 1st century BC. And then the other 3, that one's not very good, the first one. It's kind of like the oldest one, but it's not considered the most famous. Plutarch's work, written about almost 2,000 years ago, is the most famous work. That one was written by Plutarch, who's a Greek writer. It's called The Life of Alexander. That one is considered usually the one that's considered the most famous, more or less. So that one's really the most famous one that really talks about a lot of the biographical information about Alexander. Arian Nicomedes, who I've talked about before, is another writer, Greek writer, that also wrote about Alexander. It's actually called the Anabasis. It's what they usually call Anabasis of Alexander. It should be actually there in that slide. And sometimes they do call it the Campaigns of Alexander, and it goes through the conquest of Alexander as he conquers the Persian Empire and all of that. Also, Quintius Curtius Rufus was another famous historian that was also well known as well. So he was big but he's more like a Roman historian that's not quite as well known compared to some of the other ones. Now, what Alexander is more known for, of course, which I'll talk a few minutes today about as well, is that he, of course, is famous for conquering the Persian Empire. So he would go on eventually to conquer the Persian Empire. That occurred over a period of like something like 4 years, more or less. Anyway, he would defeat eventually over time, which was King Darius III. He was one of the last Persian kings that would rule over the Persian Empire. I think he had come to power a few years right before that, King Darius. I think I've got a slide on Darius the Great. I think he had just come in about 338 BC. Anyway, you can see he reigned about 8 years, you can see in that slide. He was not a very good ruler, King Darius III. In fact, he'll be eventually deposed by Alexander after Alexander conquers all of Persia. They do think that Alexander subdued the Greek city-states, and he got them to eventually get involved in this great conquest, which, of course, I told you Arian called it the Anabasis of Alexander. So I think Anabasis kind of meant the adventures or something, or travels of Alexander or something like that, more or less. So a lot of the Greek city-states would align with him and join up to fight the Persians and all that. First, he would invade, they think, Western Turkey about the spring. It'd be like spring, or like probably about May 334 BC, roughly. It's about when it was. I think I've got a map showing you. We go down here later in the slide. There's Alexander of Bucephalus. But you got a slide kind of showing you the empire of Alexander later, and also the route that Alexander took in his conquest, where he went from Greece all the way to basically India, right here. And so you can see in this map, he would first cross over into Turkey, where the Hellespont is, between Greece and what is Turkey. And over time, what he would do is they would have one battle that they would fight first, which would be against Darius III's forces, which were some of his satrap forces that were in Turkey. King Darius wasn't involved in it, but his forces would actually be beaten by Alexander's forces at the Battle of River Granicus, which I don't think that map shows you where it is, but the River Granicus was close to where the ancient city of Troy is, which would be like in the northwestern part of Turkey. It was really considered to be Alexander's first military victory against the Persians, and he would smash them mostly using his cavalry. And then from there, he would then push into what is take over like Western Turkey, seizing like the coastline. You can see him coming down the coastline after he would enter Turkey, and then push inward into Turkey towards like closer to like Syrian Mesopotamia. So that was really his first success, was to seize now what we call Turkey in this area right here. So because of that, Darius realizes what's going on in the West, this attack that's coming across, the Aegean there. And so Darius III is forced to counterattack. That's one of the things that happens. So he sends more forces, of course, against Alexander to fight with Darius. And what happens is Darius amasses a huge army, which may have been six figures, like close to like 100,000, they believe, close to where Syrian Turkey is, like the border of Syrian Turkey, right near what they call the armpit of Turkey. I don't know if you know that what that they call that, but some people dub that the armpit of Turkey, right here between like Turkey and Syria. And Darius III realized if he doesn't stop Alexander here, it's going to allow Alexander to march either into Mesopotamia or into Syria, Lebanon, and then maybe even, of course, into Egypt down here, southern part of the Mediterranean Sea. At what is Issus, also called the Battle of Issus, just as like say close to where the Turkey-Syrian border is, Alexander's companion cavalry wins the battle again. What happened was Darius III couldn't get enough forces in to attack Alexander because there were some mountain ranges that were kind of to the east of his flank, and so Alexander took advantage of that, and so he attacked the Darius's left flank with a companion cavalry, finding a gap there. When he broke through, what happened was it caused Darius's army to collapse at the Battle of Issus. And what happened was Darius actually fled the battle as a coward, which Darius is kind of known for that. If you study about Darius III, he's a horrible commander, and his forces would eventually basically, collapse at that point. And that battle was Issus was very strategic, probably one of the most strategic battles really of the whole, wars against Persia with Alexander. And it led to the fall of Syria, then it allowed Alexander to march southward and take over where Lebanon is, take over where Israel is. And then you see he came around there and, of course, eventually took over what is Egypt as well. So anyway, so that's really his folly, Darius, like fleeing the battle and all of that. If you're coming in and out, you just have to go back and watch everything because I'll edit this lecture later. So I had some stuff, snafus in there. But anyway, so that was like the western half, at that point, the western half of the whole empire falls to Alexander the Great. So that'd be probably like only just maybe a fourth of it at that point. But from there, he's going to gobble up the rest, Alexander the Great. Now, when Alexander's in Egypt, the Egyptians, adopt him as their own ruler. He becomes basically Pharaoh of Egypt. The Egyptians didn't really like the Persians. They were kind of unpopular because they had ruled over Egypt for about 200 years almost. And so Alexander was declared as the son of Amun-Ra by one of the oracles of Amun, which is the Oracle of Sawab, which is located in western Egypt. And while Alexander's there, he begins to kind of Hellenize or make Egypt more Greek-like. And of course, one of the first things that Alexander does, if you know about it, was he builds the city of Alexandria, which will be, if you know about it, one of the chief main cities in the East. That's Hellenized, or part of the Hellenistic world, as they called it. He also later starts building the Library of Alexandria, which is one of the first, modern libraries built in, one of the first, ancient libraries built in the Greek-Roman world at the time, which was also there as well. So at that point, he's in Alexandria. He's not there, but I think he's only in Egypt like 10 months or something like that, Alexander. And while he's in Egypt, Darius sends some ambassadors to him to make peace offerings. And I think they ask him like, hey, we want to end this war, and I'm willing to give you part of my empire, which I think included, I want to say, all the way up to like the Euphrates River. He was going to give Alexander that amount of territory. And then he was going to also give Alexander, I think one of his, he was going to give Alexander one of his wives in marriage at that point. And Alexander thought about it. And then what happened was he had a meeting with his generals. And in the meeting, which is very famous, one of his generals spoke up, which was Parmenion. And Parmenion said, if I was Alexander, I would take this deal. And Alexander stood up and said, if I was Parmenion, I would. Was a famous reply. So yeah, he decided no against that deal. And Alexander decided that, if I've already come this far, he thought he could pretty much defeat the rest of the Persian Empire. So he kept going. And so in 331, Alexander then invaded into Mesopotamia, into Iraq, of course, next. And that led to the famous battle of what is called Gaugamela, which that little video clip kind of talked about more or less. That happened in October of 331. You can see the dates on it if you want to see them later, but those are the dates. Issus was like November 333, and then Gaugamela, the more important battle, in October of 331 BC. That one was considered really Alexander's most strategic battle. It's the one where basically him and Darius fight again a second time, like a second battle. And it pretty much decided, the fate of the Persian Empire. And it's also called also the Battle of Arabella. That's another name. I think they dub it as well. And then Gaugamela is the more common name as well. And the battle is famous for the Greeks under Alexander being heavily outnumbered, like 4 or 5 to 1 odds. They think Alexander had 50,000 troops, and then they think Darius had something like 100. They think he had maybe 250,000. I don't know if that's really right. 250,000 possibly in those forces, which I don't know. It's kind of those are ancient numbers more or less. So nobody really knows for sure if that's really true or not about the size of it. But so yeah, that's possible. But they definitely were outnumbered. That's something that the Greek writers, like Arian, I think one of them, Curtius Rufus, I think thinks they pretty much were outnumbered heavily. And what happened in the battle was that the companion cavalry played a major role again, and why Alexander, of course, won. And his cavalry was able to strike at a gap that was in Darius's left flank. And what happened in the battle was Alexander tried to stretch out Darius's forces to kind of make it seem like he was going to attack his left flank. But in the middle of the battle, the companion cavalry turned like a 90-degree turn, and they attacked the center instead. And what happened in the battle was Darius fled again. He fled the battle and as a coward, like I said, a second time. And I think Alexander thought that might happen again with that. So with that done, the whole Persian army collapsed. And so it enabled Alexander to pretty much, conquer the rest of the Persian Empire. And after defeating Darius, Alexander kept going east. He would eventually push into what is the heart of the Persian Empire, which is, of course, modern Iran. And he would take the capital of Persepolis. That would be taken at that point. And, of course, later, I told you the story about this before, I think already. We were talking about the Persian Empire, but Alexander would later be known for, of course, conquering the, Persian Empire, and then after that, burned down their capital, which is, of course, Persepolis, which they think he did it in anger because of the fact that the Persians had burned Athens and other, Greek city-states, and so he was kind of getting revenge for that, more or less. All right. So anyway, so that's basically at that point, Alexander's only 25. That he's pretty much defeated the Persian Empire. However, he kept going. Like if you go back to that map I just showed you, more or less about Alexander, they would keep going. The Greek forces and Macedonian forces would push eastward. And you can see there they would go on to conquer other parts of the east because the Persian Empire stretched, like I said, all the way to what is the Indus River Valley. And they would take over Afghanistan. They would take over Pakistan. They even took over part of northern India, descending down into the through the Hindu Kush mountains I've talked about before, and the Khyber Pass, etc. So that's how eventually it gets into India at that point overall. There are some other slides if you want to look at them later, but they just kind of show some of the battles if you want to look at it, like the battle. I didn't really go through the battle maps, but if you want to look at those later in the PowerPoint, you can go through there. More or less. Now, a few more things I'll talk about Alexander now. What happened when he got into India, more or less? There was one more battle that they always talk about that Alexander fought, and it's called the Battle of the Hydaspes or River Hydaspes, which happened in, they think, maybe May of 326 BC. And there was this Indian king by the name of Porus who fought Alexander the Great. His force had about 30,000, which I think had less forces than Alexander. Alexander probably had more than that, 50, 60,000 at the most, maybe, possibly. But Porus was this king or prince that lived in the northern part of India. It's called the Punjab region, which would be like where the tributaries of the Indus River start. Like right below the Himalayas. Porus had relevance, which the Greeks had never really fought before much. I think the Persians had them, before, but they were used as pack animals, not used like as cavalry. And so it made the battle like a challenge, like really bloody, more or less. And it also was pretty bad because it was fought during the monsoon season. It was like raining a lot. And there's a story where Alexander actually had to, he actually did this maneuver where he crossed the river and he attacked the left flank of Porus's forces. It's pretty amazing. It's like a 90-degree turn. He crossed the river and then turned his army, attacked their left flank. Actually, the right flank, I think is what it was actually. Anyway, so he turned their flank, and with that, he was able to win the battle. But what happened was it was really bloody. His horse got killed. I don't know if you know this or not, but Bucephalus got mortally wounded in the battle. Alexander was wounded too in the battle as well. Not mortally, but he was wounded. And his horse died afterwards. And then the Greek forces were angry. They didn't really want to keep going at that point. And so his forces basically just quit on him. They mutinied, and because Alexander wanted to keep pushing onward. He wanted to push eastward, I guess, conquer all of India and then conquer China and maybe reach the Pacific Ocean, I think was his main goal over time. So Alexander just sat in his tent and wept because the old joke was that he had no more worlds to conquer at that point. So what happened after that? Alexander then took his forces down to the mouth of the Indus River, and they split up. They did, and half his force went back through the Persian Gulf via ships they built, and then the rest of his force, Alexander took the other half of the army back through the southern deserts of Persia, anyway. What happened was he got back in 324 BC. Babylon, because Babylon was going to like to be his capital eventually. That's the plan anyway. I think at that point of Alexander, he was planning to rebuild Babylon, and it was going to be the capital of his new empire that was forming. And within a few months after his death, after he came back, he eventually died of some kind of illness that he came down with. He became ill, and he kind of went into a coma, or in and out of a coma, they think. They think around June of 323 BC. He died at the age of 32. And of course, if you know about the death of Alexander the Great, it's been a mystery. In fact, it's still a mystery today. Nobody knows like exactly what killed him. I know a lot of doctors today seem to theorize that if it was an illness, it was from either malaria or typhoid fever, one of those two, which is a type of illnesses that come from mosquitoes. So they think that's one theory that may have killed. That's the popular theory, I know. And then there's another popular theory too. That he was poisoned as well. He was poisoned, and they think that his mother, I think his own mother, Queen Olympias, thought that he was poisoned and all that. So that's very interesting about that. So I don't know. It took him a while to die. Like I want to say, he got ill and he died within like 10 days or something like that. So it's, it seems like it was poison. He would have died faster, but I don't know. Depends on what kind of poison it is, more or less. After his death, his empire was broken up. So his generals took a hold of it, and they started fighting over it in like a civil war. And it became known as the Wars of the Diodachi, is what people called it. The Wars of the Diodachi, they would last like 322 to 301 BC. These wars, the word Diodachi meant successor. And so what was going on was that these generals were kind of fighting to fight for control of the empire, like who would succeed Alexander the Great. And so hence the name being, of course, used. The wars were, they were pretty bloody. Of course, one of the results of the wars, if you know about it, was they killed off a lot of Alexander's relatives. Like his mother was murdered. Alexander had a son who would have been Alexander IV. They killed him because Alexander's real name was Alexander III, Macedonian. So they killed his son, Alexander IV, more or less. I think anybody related to him, I think they had him killed off too, because they didn't want any of those people getting the throne or whatever, I guess. Over time, his empire was broken up. It was broken up into various, what they call Hellenistic states that would rule the region. And the two most famous I'll give you three that were famous or well known. The one that was the most famous was the Ptolemaic Kingdom, which ruled with the Ptolemaic dynasty. I've got a map showing you all these different states that would form, which is right here. No, not that one, this one right here. That's showing the actual empire of the Persians he conquered. But this one shows all the Hellenistic kingdoms or states that would form afterwards. And you got the Ptolemaic one, you can see down there on the bottom in yellow. So that's one of them that's the most famous. It was founded by King Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander's generals that went back to what is Philip II. It's called Ptolemy Soter, and he's the one that would create this state. The Ptolemaic Kingdom was the longest lasting one that they had. It would go on to what is, I think, around 3031 BC. It goes all the way down to Cleopatra. Then you have the one in that teal green color you see where it says Seleucus. That was the Seleucid Empire, which was mostly in Iran, Iraq, and part of Syria. It was founded by this guy named Seleucus I. He was another general that was under Alexander, and his empire was the largest, the Seleucid Empire. It lasted till Roman times, but that one in the Ptolemaic was conquered by the Romans later. Also, the Antigonus or Antigonid, I think it's either called either one, dynasty and state was another one, founded by Antigonus the First, also called Antigonus One-Eyed or Cyclops. His state was that one in that pink color in the middle where Turkey and part of Syria is. That one collapsed. It didn't last long. It fell in 301 BC, and parts of the state were gobbled up by other states afterwards. And then Macedonia, which you see in that kind of bright green color up here, which is in this color right here where it says Pella, that would separate, and they would move on as a separate state, which would be the Kingdom of Macedonia. It was ruled by these two rulers that were Antipater and Cassander, who were father and son. They were generals that were under Alexander. That was another state. There's another called Lysimachian or Lysimachius. See in that purple color west of the Black Sea? I don't know if you see that. That was another state that was also there right here. Kind of like where Bulgaria, Romania is today. So all those you're looking at, like most of it, like all the way to maybe Iraq, all that will be eventually conquered by the Romans. The Romans will eventually take it all over time. So now another thing about Alexander's conquest, it started a new period. They call it different names: Hellenistic period, Hellenistic age, which I've talked about. And like it says, it was kind of this extension of Greek culture, where the Greeks spread their culture all the way to the Near East, into Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, even to India at one point. So anything from the Greek religion, Greek poetry, Greek plays, Greek philosophy, Greek government ideas, all these kind of ideas, spread to the Near East at one point. This period lasts about around 300 years. So it goes from like maybe around the death of Alexander, 323, and it goes down to either 30 or 31 BC. It's kind of a debate about when it ends, more or less, but they usually end it with the Romans conquering Egypt and Cleopatra killing herself. So I think it was in 30 BC or something like that. And so that's pretty much the short Hellenistic period. And it doesn't last long. It's only around a short time. And of course, with the conquest of Alexander were really, very, very quick, that they were here and gone. And so it's hard to say what would have happened, if Alexander would have lived. So history may have been different. All right, let me go and just quickly review real quick, and that's it for today. Who were the Macedonians? Where did they develop? The Macedonians were Greek peoples that lived in northern Greece, around Macedon, Macedonia. Who was the King Philip II? What was he famous for? Philip was a 4th century Macedonian king. He was, of course, the father of Alexander the Great. He was also known for developing the Macedonian military. What was the Macedonian military's main centerpiece of its armies? They used phalanx infantries with sarissa, which were these pikes that were 18 feet long that I told you about. They were known as the foot companions, usually. And then they had the the cavalry, which was called the companion cavalry, which uses an offensive weapon. And then the infantry was used as a defensive weapon. So I talked about the whole sword and shield tactics they had. Who is Queen Olympias? Queen Olympias was the mother of Alexander, also the main wife of Philip II. That's who she was. What allowed Alexander to seize power in 336 BC? Philip II was assassinated by one of his ex-bodyguards. I think his name was Pausanias. And so that allowed Alexander to consolidate power. What are some interesting facts about Alexander? We talked about the fact that Alexander was tutored by Aristotle. He was famous for his horse, Bucephalus, that he basically was able to ride. Also, I talked about his best friend, Hephaestion, that was well known. Talked about the ancient works and authors that wrote about Alexander. They had the one on Plutarch was the most famous, called The Life of Alexander. They have the one by Arrian of Nicomedia called The Anabasis of Alexander, sometimes called The Campaigns of Alexander. Curtius Rufus, another one, wrote the history of Alexander the Great. I wouldn't worry about that fourth one. They had that other one, Diodorus of Sicily. I don't know about that one's as important, but that was the oldest one as well. What empire did Alexander eventually conquer at 330, or start conquering at 334 BC? That was the Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire. The ruler that was part of it was King Darius III. What major battle fought near Syria allowed Alexander's forces to conquer Lebanon and Egypt? That was the Battle of Issus. So he would seize that, and then that victory, and then he would march southward, take the western half, of course, of Darius III's empire. What famous city did Alexander found in Egypt? Alexandria, which is still there today. And that's, they think, of course, where Alexander's actually buried today. They've never found his tomb, though. What great battle fought in Iraq was Alexander's greatest military victory? He destroyed an army 5 times his size. Battle of Gaugamela, fought in eastern Iraq. How old was Alexander when he defeated the Persian Empire? He was about 25. What other parts of Asia did Alexander conquer? He took over Iran, took over Afghanistan, took over Pakistan, and he even invaded into northern India, where the Indus River basin is. What Indian king tried to stop Alexander's invasion in northern India? That was the king or Raja named Porus. What was the name of the battle? It happened in 326 BC, maybe around May. That was the Battle of the Hydaspes, or River Hydaspes, which Alexander won. What military innovation the Greek forces of Alexander encountered when he was attacked in the Battle of Hydaspes, or river? That was war elephants, which the Greeks had never really fought before. What forced Alexander to return to Iraq around 326 BC? His troops. His troops mutinied against him. What likely caused Alexander's death? That's a mystery still, but they think it's either illness from like malaria, or maybe typhoid fever, or maybe poison. What was the result of Alexander dying? His empire was broken up by his generals. They would kind of break it up into multiple states. It was later called the Hellenistic States, or kingdoms. What historical period followed? Why is it called this? They have the Hellenistic period, or Hellenistic age, that followed. It's called this because of the fact that Greek culture was spread throughout the Near East. And so from like Turkey to Persia to Egypt to India, all that area was somehow affected and influenced by Greek culture, more or less. So it's kind of like a Greek-like period, or Greek-like age, which is kind of what it means, Hellenistic, the term. What civil war between Alexander's generals followed? 322, about 301 roughly BC. That was the wars of the Diodachi, the successors. And so his generals fought to try and succeed Alexander the Great, who had died in 323. Wars of Macedonian Hellenistic states that emerged afterwards. They had the Ptolemaic Kingdom, ruled by Ptolemy the First, Ptolemy Soter, and then it was in Egypt. Then you had the one Seleucus, who was a general of Alexander. He formed the Seleucid Empire. Antigonus, another general, founded the Antigonid state in Turkey and part of Syria. That one collapsed though early. They also had the one I told you, which was, I think it was Antipater and Cassander, would continue the Macedonian kingdom, which would later be conquered by the Romans as well. So those are pretty much the main ones. There was also the Lysimachian one, which I wouldn't really worry about that one. So anyway, just kind of like went through, of course, discussing the rise of Macedonia, with mostly talking about Alexander the Great. So I'm going to try to get that lecture up afterwards. I may have to edit it because there was some junk in there. I don't know what that was from Facebook. I need to watch that and see who that was. I'm going to try to see if I can block that guy. But anyway, so that's it for today. That's going to conclude pretty much my lecture material for the semester for that second exam material for the semester overall, and that's going to be pretty much it. So I will see you later this week. On Wednesday, I'm going to have a later lecture coming up, of course, on the Romans that I'll have, and I'll have that up later about the announcement. I think at 12 noon you should get an announcement though about the second exam. There should be something coming up about it, and I don't think the second exam is going to be open till probably 12 noon because I've got to work on some stuff and get that last PowerPoint up for you, and with the lecture and all that with the YouTube lecture. So that's it for today. I'll see y'all on Wednesday for another lecture later. Most of you will see this later, of course, the lecture on YouTube. So that's it for today. I'll talk to y'all later. Okay. So y'all take